Hey, I'm Tobi and welcome back to this small corner of the internet where I talk about these things, books. And in today's video, I'll be talking about my worst books of 2020. Seeing as I read 46, only 5 made it to this list, so shows what a pretty good reading year I had last year. And let's get into the video. So the first book that I'll be talking about is Anxious People by Fredrik Backman. And I came into this book with high hopes, guys. High hopes. I thought this was going to be a 5 stars. I thought it was going to be making my best books of 2020. And if you want to know what those were, I'll link those 2 videos down below in the description box. Yes, there are 2 videos because yes, apparently I can talk for England, which I am doing now. So Anxious People by Fredrik Backman. It's about a bank robbery. And that goes wrong. As a person, they're going through it. They're like, let's rob a bank. Doesn't go quite to plan. In their escape, as they're trying to make a little runaway, they end up stumbling into an apartment that's open because there's like an open viewing, open house going on. And then ends up taking all these strangers just trying to view a house and takes them hostage. And then we go from there in the story. So really fun, exciting premise. Emphasis on the premise because the execution, it wasn't a bit of me. I was really excited because I was like, oh, there's the mystery thriller element, you know, hostage situation, what's gonna happen? And then also it's finding out what led up to the events of this day. And then all this character study and deep dive into all the different strangers that have been taken hostage. And you find out about their grievances, you find out about their secrets, you find out about their passions, and it should all work. The ingredients are there. But every single character that was held hostage was obnoxious, was ridiculous, hyper unrealistic, genuinely just annoying. They were all idiotic, to be frank. And yes, I get that was partly intentional for an aspect of the plot, them being these bumbling idiots. But it genuinely made the reading experience frustrating. Like, it grated on me so much. So this ended up making most of the dialogue just unbearable for me. Then the 2 characters, the detectives who are trying to dilute the situation? No. De-escalate, that's it. De-escalate the situation. They were just boring. They were normal. They weren't annoying like the other characters, but then they were just boring. You're meant to have this lovely father-son dynamic and yada, yada, yada. But nah, honestly, I wasn't interested. Do not remember any of their names. I didn't care for them. Sorry to that man. With all the different character studies and deep dives into their hostages, there are a lot of deep stories, that's the thing, and that's why for a lot of people they love this book, and that's why it does have high ratings, because it restores their faith in humanity, that feel good, wholesome, warm-hearted tale. But I just found myself not caring about any of their stories because they were all just so annoying. So instead of restoring my faith in humanity, instead I was questioning my own humanity, like, how do I not care at all about what's happening to these people? And Backman's writing, yes, I get the whole, like, kind of quirky, I'm not like the other girls, but it just started grating on me after a while. Like, just say the sky's blue. Like, you don't need 5 sentences to be like, the sky was as blue as a deep sea, which reminded me of the first time that I looked in my lover's eyes and realized he was the one for me. Oh! However, as I said, this book has high ratings. Maybe the book isn't the problem. Maybe I'm the problem. Who knows? But yeah, Anxious People, not for me. Oh, before I forget, I gave it 2 stars. Not the worst thing I've read ever, so I'm not going to give it a 1 star, but yeah. And now onto the second book, which also was a 2 stars, and that was The Southern Book Club's Guide to Slaying Vampires. Gorgeous cover. And to be fair, Anxious People, gorgeous cover too. And again, I went into this one with not super high hopes, but super high hopes, you know, just the one super. I was pretty excited. It was almost sounding like Desperate Housewives, Stepford Wives meets a bit of fantasy, and I was like, okay, I can get on board with this. But I was wrong. Very, very wrong. Again, it was another one of those books where the reading experience was genuinely just frustrating and not enjoyable. But before I digress, let me tell you what this book is about. We are following Patricia, who is a suburban mom who lives in the South in America, and it's in the 90s. And then she joins a book club. Does she start it or join it? She joins or starts a book club, one of them. And they really focus on like true crime, you know, kind of like supernatural fiction, stuff like vampires and Dracula and all that good stuff. And then a new guy comes into town. He's mysterious, seems a bit strange, but becomes soon very embedded in the community, becomes an integral part of the community. But then things start going a bit awry, you know, children are going missing, and Patricia starts putting one or two, using all the true crime knowledge she's gained from her books, and is like, he's a culprit. But she's just thinking he's like the next Ted Bundy. But then turns out that he's a lot more monstrous than she realized. And then we go from there. So really fun, exciting premise. So my problems with this book: Patricia, the protagonist, wow, she was one-dimensional. And I completely get that for maybe the first half of the book, you know. She's meant to be this stereotypical suburban housewife who, as I said, her identity literally is just meant to be being a good wife, a good mom, and a good part of the community. However, her character growth, her character development, where was it? Where was it? She just stayed one-dimensional. She stayed flat. And I find it so frustrating reading about female protagonists who just lack common sense, who don't learn from mistakes. So, to me, it was quite obvious it was a cis man who was writing about a woman. Also, it's racist energy. And yes, I understand historical accuracy. This is the South in the 90s. Of course, racism thrive. Rachel. Okay, so yes, racism is rife in this period. I mean, it's rife now, but that's a discussion for another time. But the way Hendrix wrote about it just made me uncomfortable. Again, like, it was obvious it was a white person who was writing it. I think that was my issue with this book, where it's meant to be touching on these themes about being a woman, a suburban housewife, motherhood, womanhood, women coming together, like on these racist themes and elements which are brought into the book, as it's black children that go missing only. So, you know, we've got a racist vampire. I love that for us. But it was just too obvious it was a white cis man writing it, and that's not a good thing. It's not a compliment that I'm saying that. And then with Patricia's son, there was this random Nazi obsession that was thrown in the book. Not because it added to the plot, added any value to the storyline or anyone's character growth. It was just thrown in there for banter. Hey, Nazism? Yeah, why not? I was like, okay, is this going to lead to something? Perhaps no. So again, like, no, thank you. No. And to be fair, there was some like good tense scenes which were in the book where, you know, my heart is racing, but not enough for a light horror book. It wasn't awful, like his writing style and pacing, that wasn't bad. It was just the content and the way he wrote about it. And as I said, it was writing on things which I don't think he was able to execute very well. And if the issues that I've just mentioned to you you're like, it doesn't really bother me too much for a fictional book, or I could get past that, I can see past it, then this could be a good book to use as a stepping stone into horror. As I said, very light horror, kind of almost literary fiction, but just with, of course, like slightly supernatural and horror elements, a slightly thriller elements sprinkled in there, but not too scary. So it's a good stepping stone, I think, into that genre if you're interested and you don't know where to start. As I said, that's if you don't mind a very frustrating, grating reading experience, because for me, Yes, I did get through the book quickly, so I was like, oh, how is it going to wrap up and end? But to get there, I was just finding myself annoyed, like, you're almost just flipping the pages, like, can we just get to the end and to the meat and the action of the story? And if it's a bit of you, who am I to judge? I mean, maybe I'm judging a tiny bit, just a teeny bit, but nah, you do you. So number 3, we have Never Let Me Go by Kazuo Ishiguro. This book, I know this is a very beloved one. It's meant to be considered like one of his greatest novels, but let's just agree to disagree, because no, wasn't for me. This book I gave 2.5 stars. And I want to start off by saying this actually is not a bad book. It's not an awful book. It just was not for me. It didn't give what I thought it was going to give. But again, before I get into all of my ranting, let me tell you what it's about. So we're following a group of students who are at this seemingly very pleasant English boarding school. And we are seeing it all through the point of view of our protagonist. Is it Catherine? I'll insert the name somewhere there. And at this school, interestingly, it's art and literature that are placed as a priority above all else, everything else. That is how your status is seen at the school in the eyes of the teachers and other students, not how good you are at sports, not how academic you are in terms of like math, sciences, history, blah, blah, blah. It's all about your poetry, creative writing, your drawing, your sculpturing, all of that good creative stuff. And also they have almost no contact with the outside world, apart from the people who come and do deliveries and things like that. So you know something from the beginning is like, something's a bit weird here. Something's a bit sus. And of course, a big part of this book is figuring out, what is this school? Why are they kind of cut off from the outside world? Why are the teachers a little bit weird around all the students? Unfortunately for me, the clues that were sprinkled in were just too obvious. Like you figured out, well, at least I figured out pretty quickly what was going on. In this book, you follow this group of friends as they eventually realize what their school is. And they don't realize that until they actually leave the school. And then you follow their life whilst they're out in the big, bad, wide world. And it's the kind of book that then would be really, really great for discussion in a book club, or if you were analysing it for an English lit paper or essay. However, I really did not enjoy the format or the writing style of this book. It's very much kind of a stream of consciousness, and it's Kathy, that's her name, and it's Kathy just vomiting all her thoughts, almost as if the book is like her diary or journal. And I don't mind that as a format, but again, this was a very one-dimensional character. And to be fair, this is partly intentional, I imagine, because of the plot. I don't want to give any spoilers, but it just meant then I just was not connected or invested at all. And I don't always have to be connected to characters to be able to enjoy a story. Not by any means. But this kind of story where you're just stuck in her head, if the person's boring, they're not dynamic and just if he's being in their head, it's also and it's just not fun. Almost all the characters were unlikable. And again, I don't mind that if that adds to the story, except for Tommy. We love Tommy on this channel. He was the only one I cared about. Yeah, I actually do understand why this book is loved. I really do think the premise and the story and the themes that it speaks on are really great. And I definitely will read more of Kazuo Ishiguro's work, as I can tell he's an extremely talented writer and author. But just this story, the execution of it, just because I didn't like and couldn't connect to any of the characters, just meant it didn't work for me. So this is more it just wasn't for me. Just found it a bit boring in the end. So that was a shame, but I am excited to read more of his work, and this could be one you could really enjoy. So it's not a book that I would bash, you know, just wasn't for me. Oh, number 4. The Other Boleyn Girl by Philippa Gregory. I only got 5% of the way through this book. And with very good reason. Very, very good reason. So this book essentially is set in the Tudor period, you know, King Henry VIII, and it's about Anne Boleyn and Mary Boleyn and how these two sisters are competing and vying for Henry VIII's attention. And obviously this is historical fiction, and let me say emphasis on the fiction. I didn't mind that. I was excited to get stuck in. I love a bit of Tudor history. I was like, all right. And a bit of like sibling drama, and yeah. Until I remembered that in the Tudor period, it's normal, of course, to court and marry young teenage girls. So we're reading this book from Mary Boleyn's perspective, and she's 14 at the time. And whether or not that was normal in the Tudor period for a grown man in their 30s or 40s to be moving to a 14-year-old, it is still pedophilia. And this whole book romanticizes pedophilia, especially because it's told from the 14-year-old girl's perspective. It made me so uncomfortable. Any scene with her and Henry, or any scene with her and her husband, who was also like more than double her age, and oh, genuinely, I just wanted to vomit. I wanted to literally rip my eyes out and hurl my tablet across the room. It was not a fun experience. I was like, And then she added in incest too for fun, just for bands. I was like, why? So no, if you want to read about pedophilia in a way that's going to make you feel really gross and it's romanticized, then this is for you. If not, give it a skip. Not worth it. Then my final book. Again, I have not finished this book either, just because I didn't want to risk going into a reading slump. And like Never Let Me Go, it's not a bad or awful book either. It just wasn't quite working for me. Well, let me actually tell you what the book even is called. Before the Coffee Gets Cold, Tales of the Café by Toshikazu Kawaguchi. And hey, let me start off. This could be my fault why I'm not appreciating the book as much maybe as I would have. I didn't realise this was number 2 in a sequel. I didn't realise when I picked it up. I thought this is the first one, because the first one is called Before the Coffee Gets Cold. There just isn't the little Tales of the Café added to the end. So it is the second book. But I mean, reading what I've read so far, I think halfway through, yeah. It could be a standalone book though, like it doesn't seem like it's necessary to have read the first book. And this book is about a cafe in an unassuming alley in Tokyo where you can travel in time. You can travel back, you can travel forward. But there are very, very specific rules and ways you have to go about it for it to work. So for like 95% of people, they're not going to be able to. It's just going to be a fable, a myth, a folk tale to them. But there's the 5%, and I made up these numbers by the way, that can. And this book then follows 4 people who come to this cafe to do just that. Very cute premise, you know, kind of literary fiction with a touch of like, would I say magical realism? I don't know if I'm using that term correctly, but I hear it all the time on Booktube, so I'm gonna throw it out there. A little bit of magical realism. Kawaguchi's writing style, very simple, very wholesome. However, the way the plot and storyline is almost like spoon-fed to you, it kind of makes it feel a little bit like a children's book at time. And then as well, there's meant to be all these like emotional outbursts and deep moments that happen when people go back or forward, especially when they go back in time. But I just found myself again not really caring too much. You don't really get a chance to really get attached to any of those characters, and the emotional aspects of it just seemed a little bit forced, to be completely frank. And I've seen other people who hold similar reviews, so this is not where I'm just being problematic or just hating for the sake of hating. I think because the narration style was pretty monotone and just pretty flat, it just meant the story wasn't that interesting. It was just a bit boring. It is one that maybe potentially I could pick up and finish. Like, it's not a very long book at all, but I'm in no rush to do so. For now, I'll say it's like a 2.5 stars. It's not quite a 3 because I'm not like, oh, it was enjoyable. It's just very okay. And I guess because I had such a good reading year, just okay doesn't cut it. It does not cut it for me. So those were the 5 worst books that I read in 2020. Well, I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope I did not offend anyone. And for some people, maybe the plot, the premise, or maybe even the reasons why I disliked the book could be things that you're like, that actually interests me. I want to see, what do I think? What's my opinion of the book? If that's the case, then pick it up. If you liked this video, give it a thumbs up. If you didn't like the video, just click the exit button. Don't give a thumbs down, it's all right. And comment if you read any of these books, if you also did not like them, or if you loved them. I'd love to see why and your reasons, your reasoning behind it. And if you want to join, as I said, this small corner of the internet, subscribe. If you don't worry about it. It's okay, it's okay. But I'll see you in my next video, where I will talk about my honorable mentions from my part 2 of favorite books. So look out for that. Bye.